Most marketers think if they just put enough effort into a recommendation, it will get adopted. That's not how it works. If you give someone a plan and they don't follow through, it's not because they're lazy or uncooperative, it's because the plan itself is wrong. The problem isn't that your idea didn't land. The problem is that you calculated the payoff based on 100% adoption, when in reality, even if you get 90% of people to do what you want, it still pays for itself. You don't need to convince everyone, just enough to make it profitable. This is Marketing Science, the show about building systems that work, not just ideas that sound good. I'm Mikey, and today we're talking about how 90% adoption can drive fast payback. What you're thinking right now is probably wrong. You're imagining it's a matter of persuasion or alignment, but it's not. It's an engineering problem. Let me tell you what this really means. If you design something with 90% adoption as the baseline, and your goal is to get the investment back in 2 months, then even though that final 10% won't do anything, the system still works. The math of it isn't about how much you can convince people. It's about how much impact a single change can have at scale. This idea is central to performance marketing, where we build tools and structures that make adoption easier, and that's why 90% matters. Here's how this actually works in practice. First, start by setting expectations around adoption rates. Most teams think 100% is possible. It never is, so you build your model around 90%. You define what adoption means for your specific case. Is it a new process, a change in behavior, or something else entirely? Then, run the numbers. What's the cost of implementation? What's the expected revenue from 90% adoption? If that covers the cost within 2 months, you've passed the test. Next, pick one element to test. Don't try to change everything at once. Pick a single behavior, one part of the process, and see if it shifts 10% more people than before. That's all you need for a valid result. Then, measure the delta in performance across those who adopted versus those who didn't. If your baseline is 90%, then that's enough to get a clear signal, even if it's subtle. After measuring, layer on feedback loops. You're not just seeing what works, you're optimizing how you make it easy for people to adopt. That might involve training, documentation, nudges, or reminders. The goal is reducing friction so the 10% who don't adopt don't even realize they're missing out. You're making it effortless to do the right thing and awkward to do the wrong thing. Then, iterate. If one change gets you 90% adoption, look at the next part of your pipeline that can also reach that level. You're not trying to get 100%, you're optimizing for a path that makes the most impact at scale. The process isn't linear, it's iterative, always looking for the next lever that moves the needle, and that's how you build systems with momentum. And finally, make it sustainable. If adoption starts slipping again, you've got data pointing to where to re-engage or adjust. This isn't about changing habits overnight. It's about making small, continuous improvements that add up to something real. You're building resilience into your approach so you don't just get lucky once. So what's the key takeaway? The 90% adoption rule is not a magic number, it's a design principle. You're aiming for a minimum viable impact at scale, and you don't need to convince everyone to get there. If your model is built around 90% and it pays for itself in 2 months, then you've done the math right. But here's where people mess up. They try to get 100% adoption and then wonder why nothing works. Or they ignore the math altogether and assume that just because something sounds good, it will get traction. But real systems require structure and realistic thresholds. One mistake is not accounting for the 10% who won't adopt. That's not a flaw, it's a constraint. Another trap is treating this like a creative campaign. You don't pitch ideas, your system makes adoption easy. The reason your 90% works isn't because it's exciting, it's because you've reduced resistance. That's why feedback loops matter. If people are getting nudged or trained in small ways, the 10% can become 20%, and that momentum builds. And don't forget to track the cost of not adopting. Often we focus on how much is gained from adoption, but what about how much is lost when it doesn't happen? When you build a system around 90% adoption, you're also building in safeguards. You're saying, we won't be successful unless 90% do this. That's not just a metric, it's a boundary. The system is designed to fail fast if it doesn't meet that threshold. If you don't set that expectation up front, the whole thing becomes a guessing game. In one practical example, imagine a company trying to roll out a new CRM feature. They plan for 100% adoption, but realize only about 90% are actually using it. Instead of panicking, they measure what's driving that 10% to stay away. Maybe there's confusion in training, maybe it's slow to access, or perhaps it conflicts with their daily routine. Once they identify the friction points, they adjust. They simplify the interface, offer more targeted training sessions, and add reminders at key moments. That small tweak brings adoption up to 95% over a few months, and suddenly that feature starts delivering returns. Let's talk about what happens when you're not at 90% yet. You can't just keep adding incentives or pushing harder. What you do is take the current state and map it against known user behaviors. There might be specific workflows people don't realize they're skipping, or maybe there's a step that seems obvious but feels buried in complexity. The key isn't to eliminate resistance entirely, it's to make resistance so inconvenient that people choose the easier path without even thinking about it. Say you're rolling out a new onboarding process for your team. You've mapped out where bottlenecks occur and how many people avoid each stage. Now, instead of trying to get everyone to follow every step perfectly, you target the 90% who are already engaged but could be doing better. That's when you layer in automation and decision points that make good choices default behaviors. The real power here is in designing for scalability from the start. When you build a system around realistic assumptions about what people will actually do, not what you wish they would do, you allow your changes to compound over time. You're not waiting for the next big campaign or announcement. You're engineering conditions that lead naturally to consistent results. So even when you're not hitting full adoption, you can still make progress. You're not just hoping for buy-in. You're engineering conditions where it's easy to adopt and hard not to. That's how you get real results without needing 100% commitment. If you want to see how this plays out in real campaigns and lab exercises, check out the full marketing science course at learn.mikey.ai. I'm Mikey, and we'll build systems that don't just work, systems that stick.